Good evening, folks. This is Thomas, and over the last week, we have had a lot of disturbing news coming out of the Middle East. There's a lot of really strong opinions out there right now on social media. I know I've had multiple people who I definitely look fondly upon or have positive associations with who have very differing views on what's happening right now. And some of you might not know much about what's going on. I'm not an expert. I'll disclaim by saying that. I do have a background doing bachelor's level research and writing a thesis on genocide and learning a little bit about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mostly my focus was on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it did give me a taste of ethnic and nationhood conflicts in that part of the world. So I'm going to be mostly talking about three different things. One is the semantics of using the word terrorism. The second is the semantics around the word genocide. And the third one is the overall context of the war and some issues I see with how the left is attempting to respond to this, right? First off, my first reaction to the reports coming out of the Israeli-Palestinian border was just to cry in bed for 10 minutes. I mean, let's be real. Hearing reports of people being beheaded and people being raped and kidnapped and gunned down in mass, these are things that bring to mind events in my mind like, to be real, Auschwitz, Srebrenica and Bosnia. I also think of Kigali and Rwanda, places where genocides occur, where you see this, especially with the report, I don't know if it's been confirmed or not, though, about 40 babies being massacred in Israel. That was something that happened and was a very notorious and grisly episode from the Rwandan genocide of babies being massacred in a church. I mean, these are things that are hallmarks of genocide and of the worst conflicts that we deal with as a species. And I think that I just want to get my thoughts out there, and I think that that's okay. And you'll either agree with them or you won't, but I hope maybe it will contribute to a positive conversation that is about, hopefully, with an end goal of peace. I would hope that that's the goal. So let's talk about the semantics of terrorism, right? There is no international definition of terrorism, okay? The only time the international community, as far as I know, and as far as I ever heard studying for my degree, ever came to a definition of terrorism was in 2004 when the United Nations passed a resolution as a part of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of, I just got that wrong. So I'm going off some web tabs here, and I got that completely wrong. I'm trying to make sure I get my points right. The international community in 2000, I'll just ad lib it. The international community in 2004 attempted to passed a resolution attempting to stop the finance of terrorism, right? And they defined terrorism in that context. And to put it real simply, they defined it as criminal acts, including against civilians, committed with the intent to cause death or serious bodily injury or taking hostages with the purpose to provoke a state of terror, right? It's a pretty generic definition, if you ask me. And it came in an extremely problematic political context during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The United Nations did approve it. But with that said, Doctors Without Borders, who are the folks that provided me with this information, make a really good point, which is that terrorism as a word has political and ideological connotations because one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? Which is why I don't want to refer to what's happening or what has happened in the Gaza Strip and in Israel at this point as a terrorist act. I think it's too problematic. I have a lot of respect for the Canadian broadcast system for removing that word from the mouths of their reporters 30 years ago. because I think it was smart, and they came to the conclusion that people should form their own conclusions based on evidence about what's happening. Because I think we're definitely seeing a lot of spin right now on mainstream television networks, that I'm kind of conflicted on. I mean, on one hand, I mean they're bringing people who are victims, or people who are family members of people who were just butchered, and they're giving them a microphone, and I'm so torn on it, because on the one hand, I feel horrible for these people, and then on the other hand, I feel like there might be an exploitative element to it as well. I'm not going to comment any farther on that, though. But let's go ahead and move on to genocide, right? Because I think this can clear things up a lot. So in 1948, the United Nations, as a part of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, right, they passed this huge convention which condemned genocide, okay? And they defined it quite well. Let me see if I can find the actual definition of it again. Okay, I found it, right? Thanks for bearing with me. I can't video edit either, so you must really love me if you're still listening at this point. So the United Nations just has a fact sheet on genocide, which talks about the definition that the resolution came up with. And it says that genocide is made up of two elements, right? This is where some of my expertise kicks in. The physical element, which is that the acts committed, right? So genocide, you have to have the physical acts, right? The things I talked about earlier, right? Like targeting children, targeting women, committing acts of rape, those things, in outright murder. These things have to be a part of what's going on for there to be genocide present, right? And also the mental element, which is something that scholars have gone back and forth on for a really long time, or the intent. So the intent is the most difficult element to determine according to the UN, right? To constitute genocide, there must be a proven intent on the part of perpetrators to physically destroy a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Cultural destruction does not suffice, right? You can't just be destroying structures. Nor does an intention to simply disperse a group, right? If Hamas had gone into Israel and they had killed some people, but mostly it had been about them trying to get people out of the area so that they could reclaim the land, that would not have constituted genocide as far as I can tell, as far as my fucking lay opinion is in terms of genocide, right? So this may constitute a crime against humanity, right? As set out in the Rome Statute. And the Rome Statute was a statute that the United Nations passed later on, which established the International Criminal Court, which allows us to prosecute war criminals on an international basis, okay? So it is the special intent, or dolus specialis, that makes the crime of genocide so unique. To constitute genocide, it also needs to be established that the victims are deliberately targeted, not randomly, because of their real or perceived membership of one of the four groups protected under the convention. This means that the target of destruction must be the group as such, or even a part of it, but not its members as individuals, right? So if Hamas goes into Israel and kills specific Israelis, that does not constitute genocide, right? Okay, so I know what you're thinking, right? Like, why is this guy torching Hamas? Doesn't he understand the context of all this? No, I get it. I really do. According to the definition established by the United Nations that was signed by Israel, and I don't know if Palestine or any government of it has ever signed it, what Hamas did constitute a genocidal act. I would just say, just as a lay opinion, that it really sounds like ethnic cleansing to me. If not ethnic cleansing, then it was definitely cleansing in terms of a national identity. And for the longest time, scholars couldn't agree. A lot of them said, no, it's only about ethnic cleansing. It's only ethnic cleansing, right? And I'm kind of like, does it really matter when you're killing like 300,000 people? A lot of people have referred to what the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia as a politicide, yeah. Because they only went in there and killed all the nationalists and the people who were more subscribed to an understanding of like democratic capitalism, right? And they murdered hundreds of thousands of people. I think we can just call it a genocide at this point, right? Because they killed men, women, and children indiscriminately and put them in work camps. I mean, it was horrific shit. So let's move on, right? I'm going to just throw out an example of the recent warrant, not recent, but when the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin, right? They issued it under their jurisdiction because what he was doing and what the Russian military was doing as well is they were kidnapping Ukrainian children who were toddlers or infants, and they were giving them to Russian families to be adopted, right? That is clearly, one, very messed up, and two, is a war crime, right? And I think that that is the way that, like, I would hope that I would look at these sorts of events. I don't think a person has to be an expert in order to condemn something as being wrong, regardless of the context of it, right? But let's move into the overall context of the war, right? Because right now you're not getting any sort of historical context from mainstream media, and you're not getting it from a lot of the typical talking heads on social media either. You're sure as hell not getting it from Ben Shapiro, but you're also not getting it from Anderson Cooper either. I'm sorry. Which is that this has been going on for 75 years, and the Israelis have committed war crimes against the Palestinians. It has been recognized by many international bodies that what is going on is an apartheid state against Palestinians, which is extremely illegal and effectively has put them in an open-air prison, right? It's not a good situation. What Hamas did was such a tragedy because it's basically condemning the 2 million people who are in the Gaza Strip to a pretty horrible fate. But it needs to be recognized as well that Hamas gained the power that it did and launched the attack that it did out of a series of social conditions that the Israelis largely constructed, which is the fact that they were living in a freaking open-air prison, right? I'm going to try to reel it in a little bit. I'm obviously I've gotten a little heated about this over the last couple of days. So something I'd like to point out, right, out of love, is a criticism towards a lot of my friends on the left, right? You can take it or leave it. It's a piece of feedback. I remember about 2 months ago when we're sitting here talking about the movie Oppenheimer, right? Which a lot of my friends on the left didn't like. They didn't like that it didn't have anything to do with the Japanese perspective on what the atomic bombs meant. And they also didn't like the fact that it let Oppenheimer off the hook too easily, and that it more or less just, what am I trying to say here? They more or less came at the movie with the criticism, right, and began to view history through a lot of these criticisms as like, listen, like the context of the war didn't matter. Dropping in a nuclear weapon on people and developing a nuclear weapon is inherently evil. You do not do that, right? And I tell you what, I have a grandfather who died in 1992 as a reserve force in Nagasaki a month after they dropped the bomb, who died of a rare blood-borne cancer, okay? I don't have a grandfather and never got to know him, and I can't prove it. None of our family members can. It's possible it had nothing to do with the bomb, but it probably killed him, right? So here we are 2 months later, and this horrific event has happened, right? And a lot of people are saying, well, it's not about the act. It's not about the act. It's about the context, right? I say bullshit. That's not cool. I don't think that. I think that that is evidence of not having a very good moral compass, right? Killing men, women, and children is unacceptable behavior. It is, and it is condescending, in my humble opinion. Not so humble at this point. I think it's very condescending behavior to people internationally to say that they don't know how to abide by that, right? Okay, so I'm just going to close with this, right? I can't deny the fact that I don't really have I don't have a dog in this fight. there are people who are making very important points, right? About, I mean, I saw someone make a point about the use of the word terrorism and saying it has an entire context of white colonialism driving that word. I can't disagree. I mean, I agree with that completely. It was my own personal experience. I'm old enough, I'm 31 years old. I remember 9/11 very well. And I remember the lead up to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and how just horrible they were, right? And how on board everybody was with that. According to conservative estimates, over 300,000 civilians, people who did not have weapons, who had nothing to do with weapons and weaponry, were killed in both of those conflicts. I think those estimates are low based on the studies I did. The United States basically carried out saturation artillery and aerial bombing on many places in Iraq, especially in the Anbar province, as well as in Afghanistan, right? Which is my final point that I'd like to close on, okay? Which is that when war starts, justice goes out the window, okay? When the Israelis roll across the border into Gaza, it's no longer, the point about what started it is irrelevant. It's evil. It's wrong. War is wrong. It just is, man. If I was if I was a Palestinian father, would I be shooting as an Israeli right now, an IDF soldier? Probably so. If I was an IDF soldier right now whose mom just got massacred on the border or who had family members, or would I be pissed right now? You bet your ass I would. I think and I really hope that the international community can objectively condemn violence on both sides at this point in this conflict. It is entirely possible that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are about to die. That is horrifying. Would it be an act of genocide? Anyways, I love you guys. I've been home alone with COVID for about a week. I just wanted to get my thoughts out there. I greatly enjoy the conversations I have with many of you about global events and politics. It was my hope that this was in good taste. If it wasn't, I apologize, but I stand by what I said, though. I really do. I think we need to condemn violence, no matter which side of the aisle it's on, because at the end of the day, it never gets anybody anywhere.